being said, let's move on to another section then, and let's talk about Yeshua and show some aspects of his ministry that appears to teach us that he was rejecting the Pharisaic calendar of Talmudic Rabbinic Judaism, which got their calendar from the Babylonian system that they and their forefathers were enmeshed in for some 500 years.
So the Jews were taken into Babylonian captivity ultimately in 586, and there were Jews that continued to live in Babylon until 500 AD. So there were Jews that was in Babylon for 1,000 years, and so they picked up the Babylonian customs and ways because it was survival. That if you don't do things according to how the king of Babylon says, you're going to be persecuted. So you can see how easily, rather than being persecuted, rather than die, they just adapted. So now let's look at this narrative in John chapter 7. Once again, the setting is the Feast of Tabernacles. And we have this interesting phrase in John chapter 7, verse 2. It says, the Jews' Feast of Tabernacle was at hand. Why doesn't it just say the Feast of Tabernacles? Why does it say the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles?
Well, remember, John, who's writing this, Yochanan, he's a Jew. So why would he say the Jews? That would imply to me that him being himself a Jew, that would imply that he is saying, that's what they're doing. That's not what I'm doing. That's not what we're doing with Yeshua, but that's what they're doing.
But he's specifically making a reference to the practice of the Pharisees and the Sadducees.
Sure.
And Pharisaic Judaism and their calendar. That's why he's using the phrase the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles. So as we reviewed in Leviticus chapter 23, it says you're supposed to keep the Feast of Tabernacles on the 7th month and the 15th day for 7 days. So the only way you're going to keep the Feast of Tabernacles is if you do it for 7 days. But we see in John chapter 7, verse 6, verses 8 and 9, Yeshua says to those who he's with at the time, you go to the feast. I am not going to this feast. And then when he said these things, Yeshua remained in the Galilee. So Yeshua did not keep the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days. The Jews' Feast of Tabernacles is the Pharisaic Feast of Tabernacles according to the Babylonian calendar. So we see that Yeshua is not following this Pharisaic Babylonian calendar because he's not going to the feast for 7 days. Now Yeshua kept the Torah, Yeshua kept the festivals, but he's going to keep the festivals according to the priestly calendar, and he's not obligated to keep the festivals according to the Pharisaic calendar. We see in John chapter 7, verse 14, that Yeshua did go to the feast after the feast had started. It says in the middle of the feast, he went up to the temple.
In the middle of the feast, implying it's the middle of the Pharisaic feast.
That's exactly right, because it's talked about the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles. So Yeshua was not obligated to keep the Pharisaic Feast of Tabernacles according to the Babylonian calendar, but he did use it as an opportunity. Since all the people were gathered there, he used it as an opportunity to teach. And so that's similar to what I've been doing over the years. People invite me to speak at the various Feast of Tabernacles, and so while I believe at this point in time that the proper calendar to keep the Feast of Tabernacles is according to the priestly Zadok calendar, if somebody wants me to come and teach and I can help other brethren at another festival gathering that they're doing, I'm going to use that opportunity like Yeshua did to help people to learn about the scriptures, but that doesn't mean that's the calendar that I'm following when I'm celebrating my Feast of Tabernacles.
Mm-hmm. So it appears to be a different festival schedule that he is going up to Jerusalem. It's a different Pharisee. It's a different schedule from what his festival was doing, of what he was doing according to the Torah.
Right. So if he's going to follow the Torah, he's going to follow that calendar that is in the narrative of Exodus chapter 16 that we've already gone over, the priestly calendar festival.
But this also, I also want to stress that the first day of the new year always begins on the fourth day of the week,
right,
on the Zadokite calendar.
Right.
So all the festivals will be established based on that first day of the new year on a Wednesday, on the fourth day of the week.
Exactly.
So it appears that they're not keeping the first day of the new year, the fourth day of the week, based on the Zadokite calendar.
It's called the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles.
Sure.
And Yeshua is not going to Jerusalem to keep the feast for 7 days.
And actually, there is another proof text that Yeshua was keeping a different Passover calendar from that of the Pharisees and the Sadducees in Jerusalem. Let's quickly take a look at that here in Matthew 26:18 through 19. This is the word of Yeshua speaking to his disciples, and he says to them, I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples or my students. And then the text goes on to say, they prepared the Passover. That's interesting. Why would he say, I'm going to do the Passover if it was not a Passover? It's an interesting question. Go to Yochanan or John 18:28. But they themselves did not go into the praetorium, referring to the Pharisees, lest they should be made unclean, but that they might eat the Passover. So, what's that all about? And then you go to John 19:14. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and it was about the 6th hour. And then there's this from John 19:42, when Yeshua had already died from his crucifixion. The text says that they laid Yeshua there at the place where he was going to be put into the tomb because of the Judeans' Passover preparation day. It was their preparation day, and we know clearly that it was, in the context, their Passover. So in comparing these narratives, we are going to learn a couple of interesting things. First, Yeshua celebrated and ate the Passover during the evening hours after sunset with his disciples. But quite interestingly, we also learn that Yeshua was crucified during the day of the Jewish or Judean Passover preparation day. So, what does this mean? There's two different things going on here. As I look at this text, it is very clear to me that Yeshua did not observe the Judean or Jewish Passover, which was based on the Babylonian calendar of the sighted moon. There were two functioning calendars on two entirely different days in the year of Yeshua's crucifixion. And we can say from reading the text that the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and all of national Israel celebrated their Passover based on the Babylonian sighted moon calendar. But in comparison, the house of Zadok or Beit Zadok community, they celebrated their Passover by the Zadokite biblical priestly calendar. And I think what's even more interesting is that this has been written about and discussed in great detail by academic scholars going way back into the 1950s, particularly through the work of one lady in Paris. Her name is Dr. Annie Joubert, who taught as a professor there at the Sorbonne. So with these scholars, like Dr. Annie Joubert and many others like her, speaking about two different Passovers during the week of Yeshua's crucifixion and resurrection, it remains clear to all of us that there are definitely two different calendars going on. Okay, let's move on, Eddie, and talk further about some additional points of the oral law.